Happy Friday, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Welcome to the latest broadcast of the At the Coalface Live. This is where I basically come to you live every single Friday with some news of the week and my thoughts. And lately, I've been taking a slightly different approach, and I've been a little bit more topical and going a little bit deeper on specific topics, usually triggered by specific news items that I've seen during the week. But instead of, up to a couple weeks ago, I was sort of getting through maybe around 6 to 8 to 10 news stories of the week, giving a quick hot take on each one of those. But everybody seems to be enjoying me going a little bit deeper on some of these key subjects, key topics, key news items of the week. So for the time being, I'll go ahead and continue to do that. Go ahead and drop any comments or questions in the live stream, whether that be Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn. And then I'll come back to those stream questions at the end or comments at the end, and I can speak to those right at the end. So what I want to talk about this week is logistics. And logistics have been getting a tremendous amount of airtime this year. Obviously, in the lead up to Christmas last year, logistics globally have been an absolute nightmare, both from a shipping timeline perspective, freight timeline perspective, delivery timeline perspective, but also a cost perspective. The cost to ship 20 and 40 foot containers, shipping containers around the world has increased, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and in some cases 100%, depending on the origination and the destination and which company it is and what scale they're at and whether they're chartering full ships or not. And so as a result of that, logistics have been getting a lot of airtime. And then we have local logistics being massively impacted in different countries around the world, depending on the local government's response to COVID testing, positive tests taking massive volumes of workers out of the logistics game. Then we have another piece of news this week that came out of Business Insider that looked like Shopify. They had some inside knowledge that Shopify was trying to terminate or dramatically scale back some of its logistics commitments, some of its warehouse space and capability commitments with many warehouse providers throughout the United States for its Shopify fulfillment network. And apparently it was looking to also curtail some of the services that it offers to its merchants through SFN, which admittedly, even by Shopify's statements, is still kind of, SFN is still in a beta phase, still in a growth phase. They still have yet to decide exactly how they're going to grow the Shopify fulfillment network. What is the sum total of services that they're going to be offering to their merchants, where they're going to offer it to their merchants, because this is a North America only at the moment. And so this sent massive shockwaves through the market. Now, Shopify did come out laterally, I think it was on Monday of this week, and they did make an announcement to the market and say that they're not looking to cut capacity, that they're not looking to cut services. They basically retracted or spoke against what Business Insider had heard from the market. So don't know exactly who to believe here. Don't know whether Shopify walked back its plans because of the public backlash against the discussions they've been having with their logistics providers, their logistics partners, particularly throughout the United States, their warehouse vendors. And so logistics is just getting a tremendous amount of airtime. We have a pretty big news item that came out of Australia this week. It came out of Inside Retail, and it was an article about Kogan, massive retailer in Australia, and it said supply chain snarls eat into Kogan's bottom line. And it said, citing COVID-related supply chain interruptions and associated fluctuations in demand, Kogan's post-tax profit was 14.6 million, down 70.1%. However, Mighty Ape's profit, Mighty Ape is the retailer that they bought in New Zealand last year, and it says that Mighty Ape's profit soared 147.3% to $7.1 million, which means that the combined group profit was $21.7 million, down by 58% on the first half of the year. So clearly having issues there. The other thing, there was another article that came out of Power Retail just this past week. It said, it read, Australian supply chain crisis forces customers to think and buy local. Global SOTI research finds more than half, or 60%, of Australian consumers said that they are less likely to order an item that requires shipping from overseas than they were a year ago. Now, that makes absolute sense considering that international supply chains are massively disrupted, and consumers just have a decreasing amount of confidence that if they order something from overseas, even if it's looking like it's in stock, that they will be able to get it within any kind of a reasonable time frame or cost. And so therefore they're buying off of local merchants that can guarantee supply, that say that they've got an item in stock, can guarantee supply, and within reason can guarantee supply timelines in terms of delivery. So this report found, it says, as the global and Australian supply chain crisis continues to disrupt the retail industry, consumers are being forced to change their shopping habits and buy local for speed and availability. New research from SOTI has found Australian consumers are feeling the effects of supply chain issues firsthand, with 40% of Australian consumers saying they have recently experienced one or more items not being available or have had to purchase alternatives when their preferred product was not available. 70% said they have had to go to different retailers to find items in stock. Worse still, 69% of shoppers said items they wanted to purchase have not been available at all. We also had another report out of Ocado this week, which is around their retail and logistics technology for grocery. They're a UK-based company, and it says online shopping giant Ocado has unveiled what it calls the next lead of game-changing technology, which will underpin its Ocado Smart platform. The new tech will enable Ocado and its partners to meet the full range of customer missions faster and with lower operating costs. It will help the grocer enable short lead time deliveries for a larger proportion of sales. Ocado has stated that the new developments will be one of the most significant steps forward in the company's history, declaring that its OSP is the fastest, most flexible, most sustainable, and most cost-effective suite of solutions for an operating online grocery business. The online grocer has credited its experience and know-how in driving unmatched efficiency across the entire online grocery delivery space over the last 2 decades for the OSP's latest innovations. And so they talked about things like the world's lightest and most efficient grocery fulfillment bot, dramatically lighter grids, robotic arms that pick groceries directly from the grid, world's first virtual distribution center called Ocado Orbit, increased capability for short lead time deliveries, Ocado Swift Response, and a capability for powering retailers' own storefronts with the intelligence behind the Ocado Smart platform, also known as Ocado Flex. So lots of stuff happening here in the logistics space, and I think that this will also, the ongoing challenges around global logistics, particularly for large scale, large size, we're talking about large and heavy items that have a large volumetric weight. Those things are becoming more difficult to move around the world because you can't move them by air freight, or the cost to move them by air freight just does not make it possible anymore. And so as a result of that, they continue to be shipped by sea freight only. Some smaller and lighter items, we're seeing a massive structural shift in the market from shipping those via sea freight to moving those via air freight, where it's economical to do so, or where the pricing is elastic enough in the market to where the retailers can increase their prices to offset their additional shipping costs, because they can actually at least have the items in stock on a regular basis or a predictable basis. So we're seeing structural shifts to supply chains around the world. We also have seen over the last couple of weeks massive announcements by the likes of Target and Walmart and many other very large big box retailers that they are using alternate shipping routes. They're using alternate ports of entry, particularly in the United States. The Port of Long Beach has just snarled up for days and weeks on end. And both Walmart and Amazon have talked about using alternate ports further up in Northern California. And as a result of that, just trucking from those alternate ports, which those alternate ports have traditionally been used for the likes of fishing ports and ports of entry for alternate goods other than just your standard supply chain goods for retail. And they've been used for logging and all sorts of other goods. And they've been, they're increasingly being utilized now for standard mercantile goods, and then they're being trucked. In some cases, it'll add maybe 1 day to the supply chain timeline by using that alternate port, because they have to be trucked from that alternate port to other parts of, say, the United States or other parts of California. But when goods are sitting in ports in Long Beach, for example, up to 21 days before they can get their goods out of the port, 1 extra day of trucking or 2 extra days of trucking is, a small price to pay for getting those goods into the country faster and more economically. So we're just seeing supply chain is the topic And I think it is going to continue to be the topic of retail for this year. Of course, we know that COVID continues to wreak havoc with global supply chains, mainly in the areas of workers and being able to have truck drivers. We're seeing in Canada now, we're seeing, I think it's 1 million truckers or something like that going on strike in Canada and driving to Parliament House in Canada to protest the new requirements that all truckers must be vaccinated. So vaccination mandates effectively requiring all truckers coming across the border into Canada, they must be vaccinated. So that's continuing to cause snarl ups in Canada. And so the different government regulations and moves around supply chains around the world. And, Canada, you as a Canadian citizen, you can't even leave Canada unless you are jabbed at the moment. So we're continuing to see governments around the world take different positions around COVID, and their different stances and their different evolving rules and regulations are having massive impacts on supply chain globally. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. I see supply chain being in turmoil for at least 12 months, more than likely 18 to 24 months of turmoil there. And we probably will never, ever get back to a complete state of normalcy like we were, say, for example, and if we were to compare that to 2019 or early 2020 pre-pandemic. So I think the supply chains will adapt, but I think the general rule of thumb is supply chain timelines are going to, and lead times will increase. I think that the costs of the supply chain will increase. We're seeing new technologies come to market with Google coming out with their digital twin and various other VR and AR technologies coming to the market, and metaverse type technologies, and even smart contract technologies and blockchain technologies coming to the supply chain to try to ease the supply chain disruptions that are happening, and to better track the register of custody, the chain of custody for items as they traverse the global supply chain. Blockchain technology is starting to be applied to that, and that will start to have an impact over the next 12 to 18 months. But what I think is going to happen is that is going to continue to put pressure on the metaverse. It's going to continue to put pressure on Web3 as blockchain starts to become a bigger and bigger part of the global supply chain, combined with the fact that I think end consumers, as they continue to struggle to get physical goods, they are going to continue to turn to digital goods as their alternative. Because if they can go into these newly created metaverses and they can be buying digital goods, and they can be creating digital experiences, digital worlds, digital assets that they can buy, sell, trade, and show off, if those and those can be provisioned immediately. And so that sense of instant gratification online is going to continue to push consumers to not only move into the metaverse space as it becomes available, but also to continue to pressure online sales versus physical store sales, when many physical stores just don't have a lot of stock. And because they are, many store networks, many store chains are struggling to get enough inventory to supply an entire store network. Whereas because oftentimes their distribution centers for e-commerce are centrally located, and they might only have, one web distribution center or one regional web distribution center for each region versus 20, 30 stores per physical stores per region, it is easier for retailers to keep their web distribution centers restocked than it is to keep their individual stores stocked. And so I think what we're going to see over the next 12 to 18 months is online stores having a better range and a better holding more inventory than ever before versus the physical stores. And I see physical stores in the next 12 to 18 months continuing to come under massive pressure due to these supply chain woes in that last mile. Because if we think of the store networks as the last mile requirement for retailers to get those goods into store, that is last mile delivery from all of these different supply chains, then if you don't need to use, if you don't have this diffuse range of stores and you only have one or two DCs that you're having everything centrally shipped to, then the last mile becomes the middle mile, because shipping to a DC is known as the middle mile. And then obviously last mile is to individual stores, for example. Then if middle mile isn't generally the issue, it is the last mile that is becoming it's the first mile, the originating mile, which is from the manufacturer across the ocean, for example. Middle miles tends to be okay in most instances. So trucking is mostly okay, and centralized DCs mostly okay, but it's the first mile, getting it out of the factory and getting it to its port of entry, and then the last mile, getting it to the end consumer, or getting it to those retail stores for the end consumer to come and buy. That's where the biggest bottlenecks are at the moment. Pardon me. And so I think what we're going to see here is we are going to continue to see pain in the logistics space. We're going to continue to see timelines blow out. We're going to see costs blow out. We're going to continue to see consumer disappointment around that. And we're going to continue to see a push towards the metaverse and digital goods versus physical goods. And I think that's going to continue to stoke the fires of Web3 in ways that we can't even imagine in 2022, 2023. And so I would call that out. And I would say that when we start thinking about how brands manage internal logistics, I'll speak to that for just a moment. So when brands are small, and when let's say they're a online pure play, and they don't have any physical retail stores to start off with. They may add those later, but if they're an online pure play, they start out with no physical stores. And oftentimes they will start out with, say, a drop shipping model. They're going to want to limit their exposure to holding stock. And they oftentimes, as startups, they simply do not have the operating capital to be able to hold sufficient stock in an owned warehouse or a leased warehouse to be able to own more of their supply chain and their logistics capacity and capabilities. So they'll start out oftentimes with drop shipping. They will place orders. Basically, they'll receive orders online. Then they will immediately send those orders back out again, either via CSV or email or, God forbid, fax. And they will send those off to the suppliers or via EDI, via some form of system integration. Those orders will automatically get sent off to the individual wholesaler, distributors, or manufacturers, and along with the delivery details of the end customer. And then those wholesaler distributors will ship those goods on behalf of the retailer directly to the end consumer. Now, that can create challenges in many respects, because oftentimes those wholesaler distributors and or manufacturers, sometimes their inventory counts are not accurate. And if you don't hold your own inventory in your own warehouse, whether you own the warehouse or whether you lease the warehouse, doesn't really matter. But if you're not holding inventory in your own logistics capability, in your own logistics network, then you never truly know what you have in stock at any given point in time. And there's no way for you to easily go and check. And as a result of that, that is a vulnerable position for retailers to be in when they first start out, particularly as a pure play, because you can be sure that if you're selling stuff that everyone else can get a hold of through the same local distributors, and the barrier to entry for drop shipping is basically nil, then any other retailer can come and kind of eat your lunch. The next phase of retail growth usually requires a business to move to its own warehousing. So whether that be, again, their own owned warehouse, they physically own the warehouse, they bought the warehouse space, or they're leasing the warehouse space, or they're working with their own 3PL, 4PL provider, their own third-party logistics, fourth-party logistics provider, where the goods get shipped to the 3PL, and they have some space carved out with the 3PL for them as a brand. And then that 3PL will receipt those orders and then ship them as if the brand owned that logistics capability in-house. And they'll pay, handsomely for that service. 3PL, 4PL services are not cheap, but it allows businesses to flex and scale up and down, usually very easily, very rapidly, with very low risk. And then the 3PL and 4PL, 3PL, 4PL service providers, they have to provide the ability to scale for their portfolio of merchants that they're doing shipping on behalf of. And as a result of that, they manage the scaling, they manage the warehouse staff, they manage the logistical technology and all of the warehouse management software, the order management software. They are responsible for all of that as part of their 3PL, 4PL service layer. Now, when brands get to their next stage of growth, then they usually have to start bringing, it can go one of two ways. They can either start out with in their middle stage of growth, they can start out with maybe a leased warehouse, and then they do all the shipping themselves with maybe some warehouse staff that they hire, some logistics staff that they hire. And then once they get to a certain place where it makes sense, they can move to a 3PL, 4PL model, or I've actually seen it move the other way. As the 3PL, 4PL costs start to rise, and as they start to scale as a business, in some instances, depending on the goods that they're selling, depending on the margins that they have, depending on the lead times that their customers expect, depending on a whole lot of factors, they can look to bring that 3PL, 4PL service back in-house into an owned or leased warehouse. And then it starts to make sense. At a certain point, it starts to make economic sense for them to have their own, either at the very minimum, their own aggregator and courier integration software, like a Ship It or a Starship It or one of those types of technologies, where the warehouse is still manually managed and manually organized. And so you'll have, the aisles in the warehouse, they'll be alphabetically listed or something like that, or they'll be by brand. They'll be organized in a way that humans can easily understand, or they'll be color coded or something like that. So they don't have an end-to-end warehouse management system that will tell them where to go pick, pack, and dispatch. They will perhaps get a pick list at that point, and then they will have human beings run around the warehouse that know where everything's at, and they will pick the pick list, pick to the trolley, and then take it back to the packing station, and away they go. Then the next step of growth, once you've got your own warehouse, then the next step of growth beyond that is to get a proper warehouse management system that knows where every single item and every single unit of every single item is physically in the warehouse at any given point in time, and it will create automations in the warehouse for the individual warehouse staff to be able to make them much more efficient. So you'll have wave picking, or you'll have pick to light, or you'll have, directed pick, to where, multiple pick lists are combined into one master pick list, and the routing around the warehouse from a number of steps perspective is made efficient by the warehouse management system. So there's a number of different pathways that most retailers go through when they're scaling their business, right from inception as a startup right through to hyperscale. There's some steps that they have to take, and it will depend on, again, what their business is, what they're selling, how far they have to ship things, the volumetric size and weight of most of their goods, and all those sorts of things. So there's a number of different things that businesses have to take into account, but logistics is painful for many brands, and the global supply chain woes are making it even more painful. And so many brands are trying to figure out, okay, what do we insource versus what do we outsource? And so one of the things I'm seeing brands do more and more now is through their carrier integrations, is they're starting to diversify the number and type of last mile carriers or even middle mile carriers that they engage with. And so they're trying to de-risk their dependency on any one carrier for getting their goods from them to their end customers. And so what I'm seeing is where historically a brand may work with primarily one major shipping carrier, maybe two, because remember, they want to get economies of scale so that they can pressure those individual carriers for the best carrier rates that they can possibly get. If they distribute, let's say they're doing 1,000 orders a day. Well, if they split those 1,000 orders across 4 different carriers, well, that's only 250 orders per carrier. And as a result of that, they can't put as much economy of scale pressure on those carriers for good rates as if they only have one carrier that they're pushing all 1,000 orders per day through. Then they become a much bigger client of that one carrier, and they have more leverage to be able to pressure them for better rates the more volumes that they do. So there's a trade-off to be had here. You have to have flexibility in the amount of carriers that you have available to your business at any given point in time, because lead times with one carrier can blow out very, very fast. If their supply chain is under pressure, if their logistics capability comes under pressure, then you have to be able to pivot very rapidly and work with other carriers. But by the same token, you want to try to consolidate as many shipments as you can with one carrier, so you have leverage with that carrier to get the best deal that you possibly can. So there's lots at stake here. There's lots involved here. It's lots of brands are feeling the pain of global logistics nightmare. And so they're all trying to find ways to make their business more efficient, both in terms of their internal logistics, their external logistics, supplier logistics, and the like. And so I think we're going to continue to see pressure on this right throughout the whole of 2022 and into 2023. And I think that this is going to provide additional fuel to the metaverse fire, as well as end consumers continue to be frustrated by the lack of physical goods local to them that they can trust to get to them in a timely fashion. And if they can buy those goods in a digital environment and enter that digital environment seamlessly and show off in that digital environment just like they like to do in the physical environment, then I think we're going to continue to see some tailwinds behind the metaverse that comes out of this supply chain challenge. So it's been a fantastic time being with you today. Hope you've enjoyed this discussion around global logistics and the challenges around global logistics and what you can potentially do about them as a business to start to de-risk your entire logistics function within your business. So have a fantastic weekend, and we will look to catch up with you again next week on At the Coalface Live. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.